Here is what is about to happen in a hospital room in Hong Kong in 1972, before it happens. A man is going to walk through that door. A man who has fought 40 professional fights and lost none of them, who has broken 3 opponents' ribs in the ring and sent 2 more to the hospital in the same building he is about to enter, who is going to look at the figure in the bed and laugh. And that laugh is going to be the last easy thing about his morning. But that is the end. The morning has not started yet. Hong Kong, 1972, Queen Mary Hospital, the kind of building that holds the city's most difficult facts inside it without apology, where the corridors smell of antiseptic and the lights overhead are fluorescent and flat, and the sounds are the sounds of people who are not well and the people who are trying to make them well, where the hierarchy of the outside world does not apply because the outside world's hierarchies are built on the assumption that the bodies carrying them are functioning and the bodies in these beds are not functioning, and the gap between those 2 conditions is the only hierarchy that matters here. Bruce Lee is 31 years old, and he has been in this bed for 6 days. The doctors have given him something for the fever, and something for the inflammation, and something for the pain, and his body has accepted all of it, and is doing what bodies do when they are given what they need, which is working, slowly, in the specific, unhurried way that recovery works, which is not the way Bruce Lee works, but which his body has decided is the only available pace, and which Bruce Lee has been lying here accepting for 6 days, with the specific quality of someone who has been told to be still, and is being still, and is not at peace with being still, but understands that peace is not the requirement. Compliance is the requirement. His body is in this bed. What he is inside the body has not changed. The dark eyes are open. They are looking at the ceiling with the complete focused attention of someone who has found something on the ceiling worth studying, which there is not, which means the attention is not directed at the ceiling, but at something the ceiling is standing in for, some problem, some sequence, some detail of something he has been working through for 6 days with nothing else available to work through it with. The IV line runs from the bag on the stand to his left arm. The hospital gown is white, and the blanket is thin, and the window shows a gray Hong Kong morning that is not interested in what is happening inside this room. The room is small. The walls are bare. The only chair is in the corner, and it is empty. It is a Wednesday morning when the door opens. The man who comes through it is not a doctor. He is not a nurse. He is not anyone who belongs in a hospital in the capacity of someone who helps. He is 6'1" and 220 pounds, and his name is Ray Connors, and he has been the heavyweight boxing champion of Southeast Asia for 3 years. And he has the specific quality of someone who has never been in a room where he was the most physically significant thing in it, and has organized his understanding of every room he enters around this fact. He has heard about Bruce Lee. Everyone in Hong Kong in 1972 has heard about Bruce Lee. He has heard the stories the way you hear stories about things you have not seen and cannot verify and have decided in advance are exaggerated, because the alternative is accepting that something exists that your categories cannot contain, and that is not an acceptable alternative. He stops in the doorway. He looks at the figure in the bed, the IV line, the white hospital gown, the thin blanket, the small body of a man who is 31 years old and has been running a fever for 6 days and weighs 140 pounds on a good day, which this is not. Ray Connors laughs, not the laugh of someone who finds something funny, the laugh of someone who has just had a suspicion confirmed. The laugh that says the stories were exactly what he thought they were, which is stories, and the man in the bed is exactly what he looks like, which is a sick man in a bed who weighs 140 pounds, and the gap between what the stories said and what the reality is could not be more complete or more satisfying. He steps into the room. Bruce Lee does not look at him immediately. He finishes whatever he was working through on the ceiling, takes the time he was going to take, then turns his head on the pillow and looks at the man standing inside his hospital room door with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who has just received information and is deciding what it deserves. Dark eyes, completely alert, no fever visible in them, no weakness, the specific quality of eyes that belong to someone whose body is currently not at its best and whose eyes have not received that information or have received it and decided it is not relevant to what the eyes are doing. Ray Connors stops laughing. Not because anything has happened, because of the eyes, the specific quality of the attention in them, the attention of someone who is lying in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm and a fever that has lasted 6 days and is looking at a 6'1", 220-pound boxing champion the way a man looks at a problem he has not yet decided how to solve, but is confident he will solve. The laugh dies in the room, the way laughs die when the room does not confirm them. Connors says, "You're Bruce Lee." Not a question, the specific flat statement of someone recalibrating out loud. Bruce Lee says, "Yes." One word, level, present, the complete economy of someone who has confirmed a fact and has nothing further to add to the confirmation. Connors looks at the IV line, at the white hospital gown, at the thin blanket, at the small body of the man in the bed, then back at the eyes, and he says the thing he came to say, in the tone he came to say it in, which is the tone of someone who has already decided the outcome of the conversation before the conversation began. "I've been hearing stories about you for 3 years. I came to see if any of them are true." Bruce Lee looks at him for a moment, then says, "Close the door." Connors looks at the door, then at the man in the bed, then he reaches back and closes it. The room holds the specific silence of a space that has just been made private for a reason that neither person in it needs to state out loud. Bruce Lee moves the thin blanket aside, sits up in the bed, the IV line pulling slightly as he does. He sits up with the specific controlled quality of someone whose body is currently not at full capacity and who is not pretending otherwise, and who has decided that the current capacity is sufficient for what is about to be required of it. He looks at Ray Connors from the sitting position and says, "What do you want to know?"
Connors steps further into the room. He is smiling now, the smile of someone who has walked into a situation they believe they control completely and are enjoying the control. The smile that precedes a verdict, the way Frazier's laugh preceded a verdict. The smile of 40 professional fights and 0 losses, and 3 years as champion, and the specific certainty that comes from never having stood in front of something that could revise that certainty. He says, "I want to know if you can actually fight, or if everything I have heard is just films and demonstrations and men who didn't hit back." He says it the way a man says something he has been rehearsing, the specific flatness of prepared words delivered as if they are spontaneous. The words of someone who has thought about this moment and decided what he would say in it, and is now saying it, and finding that the man in the bed is not responding the way the rehearsal required him to respond, because the man in the bed is not responding at all. Bruce Lee looks at Ray Connors with the same expression he has had since he turned his head on the pillow and found him standing in the doorway. Complete attention, no performance, no anger. The specific quality of someone who is listening to everything the man in front of him is saying and everything he is not saying, and finding both equally interesting. Then he says, "You came to a hospital to ask a sick man if he can fight?" Not a question, a fact being returned to the person who created it, held up in the light of the room so both of them can see it clearly. Connors says nothing. "You waited until I was in a bed with a fever to have this conversation?" The room is very quiet. "That tells me something about the conversation." Bruce Lee pauses. "And about you." Something moves through Connor's face, the specific physical response of someone who prepared for one version of this conversation and is receiving a different version and does not yet have the prepared words for the different version. The smile still present, but no longer connected to anything underneath it. The smile remaining on his face the way things remain after the reason for them has left. Bruce Lee looks at the IV line in his arm, then at Connors. Then he does something that Connors will spend a long time afterward trying to describe to people who were not there and will never quite manage to describe accurately. He removes the IV line himself, carefully, with the specific practiced calm of someone who has decided something and is preparing for it without drama. He sets the line aside on the bed, pushes the thin blanket off completely, and stands up. Not quickly, not as a performance, simply stands. The IV stand, the empty bed is behind him, the bare walls are on either side, and Bruce Lee is standing in the middle of it all, looking at Ray Connors with the complete expression he carries in every room he has ever stood in, which is the expression of someone who is exactly where they are, and completely at peace with being there, and has no interest in being anywhere else. Connors looks at the bare feet on the floor, at the IV line, at the hospital gown, at the man standing in front of him who should not be standing, who has been running a fever for 6 days, who weighs 140 pounds, who is wearing a hospital gown and has no shoes. And something happens in Ray Connors that has not happened in 40 professional fights. His body recalibrates before his mind gives it permission to. The specific physical response of a man who has just understood that the room he is standing in is different from the room he entered 2 minutes ago. That what is standing in front of him is not what the IV line and the hospital gown and the thin blanket and the 6-day fever suggested it was. That the distance between what the bed contained and what is now standing in the middle of the floor looking at him is not a small distance. That crossing it will cost something he did not budget for when he walked through the door. He looks at Bruce Lee's hands, then at his feet, then at his face. The smile is completely gone now. What replaces it is something more careful, the specific attention of someone who has walked into a room to confirm a suspicion and has found instead that the suspicion was the problem and not the solution, who came here with 40 fights and 0 losses and 3 years of being the most dangerous thing in every room, and is standing in a hospital room in a Hong Kong Wednesday morning, understanding for the first time that those credentials have a boundary, and that boundary is here. The room is completely silent. Bruce Lee stands in the middle of it, still, unhurried, barefoot on the cold floor, waiting with the specific quality of someone who has all the time available and knows it. Connors says nothing for a long moment. Then he says, "I owe you an apology." He says it the way men say things when they have found the only sentence available to them in a situation, and it is not the sentence they came in expecting to say. Flat, without performance, the specific flatness of a man who has just completed an education he did not enroll for.
Bruce Lee looks at him for one full second. Then he nods once, sits back down on the edge of the bed, picks up the IV line and reattaches it with the same calm he removed it with, pulls the thin blanket back over his legs and turns his head back toward the ceiling. The conversation is finished. Not because Bruce Lee has said it is finished, because everything that needed to happen in the room has happened, and the room knows it, and both people in it know it. Connor stands for a moment in the middle of the floor. Then he walks to the door, opens it, steps out into the fluorescent corridor, and closes the door behind him. The Hong Kong Wednesday morning continues outside the window, gray and indifferent, as mornings are. Inside the room, Bruce Lee looks at the ceiling, the IV line running from the stand to his arm, the thin blanket over his legs, the empty chair in the corner. 6 days of fever, 140 pounds, a hospital gown, and bare feet on a cold floor, and Ray Connors walking down a hospital corridor in Hong Kong, understanding something about the distance between what a man looks like and what a man is, that 40 professional fights had not taught him, and that 3 minutes in a small room just had. The door stays closed, the corridor holds its fluorescent silence, and inside the room, Bruce Lee works through whatever he was working through on the ceiling before the door opened. As he was before, as he will be after, as he always is, which is exactly and completely and without remainder himself, regardless of the room, regardless of what the room contains, regardless of what walks through the door. The morning holds what it holds, and Hong Kong continues around it, unchanged, unaware, as it always has, as it always will.